Mother Knows Death, starring Nicole and Jemmy and Maria QK.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this special edition of Mother Knows Death for Valentine's Day of this year. We will be talking about injuries that occur during sex, either with yourself or with someone else, including lots of foreign bodies people put into various orifices for sexual pleasure, as well as traumatic injuries that occur from having sex. So let's get into our favorite subject, which is anal foreign bodies. Now, anal foreign bodies are popular with men because of the prostate gland, which is known to be the G spot in a guy. So any guy that tells you they're not into that is totally lying. But they tend to get embarrassed to buy actual sex toys to use for this purpose. So we have a couple interesting stories to go with about this.
Yeah, so let's start with this 63-year-old patient. He was really into anal play, so he went out and he did buy a toy in this particular instance. This toy was a 4-inch silicone ball that was attached to a cord so he could easily pull it out. The problem, however, was after he stuck it in, the cord broke and he was not able to get it out. But this turns out to not be the first time he's had to go to the hospital for something like this.
So the funny part of this story, I guess, well, not funny for him, but the reason that he ended up buying a sex toy that was designed for this particular purpose was because he tried to make his own at some point, which consisted of a potato that he put a bolt into. And when he put it up into his rectum, the bolt became detached from the potato and it was stuck up there and he was not able to get it out. So he had to go to the hospital. And they had to put him under anesthesia and cut the potato into smaller pieces in order to get it out of his rectum.
Do you think he went to the same hospital? Because I just would assume you'd be mortified that this happened once, but twice. So,
I'm not sure, honestly. I agree with you there that you would be embarrassed, but at the same time, I'd be like, they did a good job getting the last one out, so maybe I'll go with it this time. And so this silicone ball, of course we have pictures of this in the grocery room. This silicone ball is about the size, I'd say, of like a pool ball, probably, like that you would use to play pool. And if it had a silicone string attached to it or silicone chain type of thing, I could see why it would break off, because you know that silicone just would get weaker over multiple uses every time you wash it and get various maybe lubricants on it that might break down the silicone, and it probably tore off of it, which it just sucks because he did try in this case.
Yeah, I don't know. But this next one we've covered on here before, but it was just too good to leave out of this compilation of all of these other stories we had. So this patient went to the ER with extreme abdominal pain. They do an x-ray and they see this large skeleton in his abdomen.
Yeah, I mean, this is up there with the most outrageous rectal foreign body, right? So they end up doing this scan. They see this x-ray, and clearly they could tell that it's an eel, a freaking eel, okay? And they go to look up the rectum to see if they could retrieve it out of him, and they can't because there was a lime stuck up there plugging it up inside of his body. So they had to open him up through his abdomen. And there they found a 25-inch or a 63-centimeter long live eel. I repeat, it was live, that had eaten its way through the wall of his colon, and it had caused poop to get all up inside of his abdominal cavity. So not only did they remove the live eel, but they also had to remove a piece of his colon, and he ended up getting a colostomy bag.
It's crazy to me that you could survive something like this.
That's the craziest part of this to you?
No, I mean everything from start to finish.
Dude, wait, the worst part of this story is that this is not the first time that this has happened. This has happened before.
Of course it is.
That people think that you could get a live animal and put it inside of your body to get some kind of sexual pleasure is just outrageous.
I mean, I guess we're going to touch on this more when we do our bestiality dissection, because this has to be in the same category generally of abusing animals for your sexual pleasure.
Yeah, I guess it is. It really is. And you know, someone did, when we posted this in the grocery room, somebody brought up a good point of if you take it alive, and this is a rather exotic animal, it's not just like a cat or a dog or something, an eel. If you take a live animal out of a person at the hospital, what do they do with it? Because they don't have an aquarium or whatever it needs to be. I don't even know how the thing was living up there, because what, doesn't it have gills and stuff? I don't even know how. I just don't even want to know. But what do you do in the emergency room? Because normally, if you had anything, you would put it in a bucket and send it up to pathology. But in this case, you have this live thing. I mean, do you call animal services to come pick it up or something? I'm not sure. It's just such an outrageous story.
Well, I guess it's considered inhumane to kill it, right? So
That's what I'm saying. It's just something that you wouldn't even think that you would ever have to do working in the hospital.
no. All right, so this 27-year-old guy, he went to the ER with lower abdominal comfort. Do you think when these men show up and they're like, I have abdominal discomfort, this is the first thing?
It's always they have lower abdominal discomfort. Yes, it's probably very triggering to the people in the emergency room.
Yeah, because your argument is always like this topic in particular blows people's minds, but it's really common that this happens.
Oh yeah, people that work in the ER are just like, this is Tuesday for us. They don't think anything of it. But
So-
usually, to their defense, it's not, you might have a lot of people coming in with shampoo bottles and cucumbers or something pretty standard. And these ones that we're talking about are just like really outrageous. So I don't think they see too many of these.
Yeah, so they asked this guy what he was up to that day, what could possibly be causing the discomfort. And he was like, oh, about 5 hours ago, I took this hot glue gun and I injected liquid masonry adhesive into my rectum. Like, oh, okay.
Yeah. For erotic pleasure. And what he didn't account for, which I don't know why, because if you're using a hot glue gun to do a craft, like an arts and crafts project, it's the same type of thing. If you're using that, you assume that when it comes out liquid that it's going to harden, right?
Well, most
So,
people think
They were
that way.
saying he didn't account for the instant exothermic reaction once the adhesive was heat up, and the adhesive instantly solidified. Now, I guess maybe they're saying that this liquid masonry adhesive isn't meant to be heated up. It's not like hot glue that's meant to be. Like maybe when you use it, it doesn't get rock hard like that. Although it's a masonry adhesive, I can't imagine that it's not supposed to get rock hard. But regardless, he injected that up there and it instantly solidified, and it left him with this chunk of rock hard material that was distending his rectum. So when they can't pull it out through anally, they have to go in, cut him open to take it out. And when they take this thing out, it looks like this custom sex toy that was molded specifically for his rectum. It's outrageous.
I mean, that is essentially what happened. He just did it in a pretty unconventional way, wouldn't you say?
Yes, I would say, but I just can't imagine in the ER and in pathology just being like, what the fuck is this? Like, what the fuck are people thinking for real?
Can you imagine knowing that your coworker had to get an emergency procedure done and everybody's nosy at the office and then
Well, the thing is, though, is that these stories we hear all the time. There's somebody that works with these people, but nobody knows the real story of why. I just had the flu for 5 days. Meanwhile, you were getting a colostomy in a bag because you had a live eel up your ass.
you would just have to make up a story, I don't know. People can do whatever they want to do. Just try not to go to the hospital.
All right, so the next topic that we're going to talk about in this sexy episode, Valentine's Day edition, is urethral sounding. Do you know what that is?
I don't really fully understand, and I don't really like the sound of
And I
it.
don't really want to. So it's basically when people stick foreign objects up inside of their urethra or their pee hole for
Makes me wanna
sexual pleasure.
Throw up. Ugh.
It may really, for me too. One of whenever I feel like I had to get a catheter like once or twice in my life for whatever GYN procedure I was getting done or whatever. But that was a big fear of mine, getting that done, and just that feeling of somebody pushing something up there. I had to get a a cystoscope at some point, which is when they put a camera up inside your bladder to look around. And I was so freaking scared to get that done because the thought of it, it makes me cringy or something. I don't know. But apparently some people enjoy it. So we have a couple stories pertaining to what happens when you do urethral sounding and it goes wrong.
I mean, I feel like this story is beyond your common like experimenting with this. This is pretty extreme. This 70-year-old guy goes to the ER. He said he was peeing blood, and he told emergency workers that a couple hours before he stuck a full-size dining fork up his urethra.
Now, you'd be happy to know that he did it handle first. So he was probably just experimenting with it and it went a little bit too far and then got stuck up there. But when they examined his penis, they didn't really see it at all. And then they did the x-ray because they were like, you didn't stick a fork in your penis. Nobody does that. No, they did. He did. And so when they saw it inside of there, they did a manual exam by feeling his penis. And then they were like, okay, now we could feel the fork inside there. So they were actually, because, I mean, what goes up must come down, right? They were able to pull it out without even having to make an incision. And he peed and was sent home.
You know, radiologists probably have the coolest job in the emergency department because it's just an unexpected venture every day between people doing stuff like this. I mean, kids swallow really crazy shit all the time, you know. It must be so cool from a scientific perspective.
It probably is. And I feel the same way about pathology because we would get all this stuff sent to us too. It's way better for us because we don't actually, like radiology, pathology, we don't have to see the patients and make eye contact with them. And the ER is a very specific people that are very personable and able to deal with these situations, because if you have a person sitting right in front of you that's telling you that they put a fork up their penis, like how do you even have a conversation, like keep a straight face and have a conversation with them? For us, it's just so outrageous. And in pathology, it's even more outrageous maybe because you just get a specimen in a white container with a lid on it and you have no idea what it's going to be, and you open it up and you're like, okay, that's a fork. Why is there a fork in a bucket up here? Okay, look at the form and see, okay, so it says urethral foreign body. That's it. So now you have to be like, what's the story here? How the hell did this fork end up in this guy's penis? You know, we don't get the full story. So there are times where we call down to the ER or something and say like, hey, just out of curiosity, what's the story with this specimen?
All right, well, believe it or not, this is not only men that do things like this. So this 29-year-old female patient went to the ER. She was complaining of painful urination and abdominal pain as well. But in her case, they probably gave her a pregnancy test. Did it assume she stuck something up one of her holes?
In their defense, listen, women typically don't do this kind of stuff. We have cases in the gross room from time to time. They're usually always these urethral sounding situations that they don't typically stick foreign objects up their rear end, or they just don't have these issues. It's usually men, and it's usually like the case we described with the fork, like an older guy, like a 70-year-old guy. So it's not, if the OR did, or the ER did have a patient come in that was having problems, then that I would think that would be my first thought as well.
Well, turns out she stuck a crystal dildo up her urethra, and it got so far up there that it got stuck in her bladder.
Yeah, so this thing looks like, I don't know that I would call it a crystal dildo. I mean, that's what they called it, but it looks like a crystal. It doesn't have hard edges like a crystal would have. It's smooth. It almost looks like the stick you would use with a mortar and pestle or something, like a smaller one. You know what I mean? It's like tapered.
It is.
That's what I thought of it.
But I think it could just be sold at a normal crystal shop as a crystal, but I think they do sell them at sex shops.
Yeah, I mean, she said she was having intercourse and she stuck it up in her urethra for sexual pleasure, and it got stuck and it went, I mean, see, for the guy, he's got the fork stuck in his urethra because men have these super long urethras that go through their penis, but women's are really short. So once it got stuck up there, it ended up going all the way into her bladder, which is just sounds terribly painful. But
This whole
I know.
category makes me want to throw up.
No, I know it's
Just to be
terrible.
perfectly honest.
But they were able to go up there with a scope and pull it out, and they didn't need to do this like a surgery to cut her open because that would have been a little bit of extra hospital time. But apparently she went to the bathroom normally afterwards, and they watched her for a little while and made sure her bladder was emptying fine, and they sent her home.
This episode is brought to you by The Gross Room.
Guys, you are going to love The Gross Room, especially after this Valentine's Day special episode, because all of these stories that we are talking about today in this episode are actual real posts from The Gross Room and have pictures and or videos to go with them. So there's one called The Old Ball and Chain that has to do with the one we were talking about with the silicone ball with the cord. There's one called Live Sex Show, which is the eel do-it-yourself dildo with the masonry adhesive. And the urethral sounding has stick a fork in it. Guess which one that is. And pistol. I don't know if you could get my joke with that one, but we have a lot more stories coming up later in the episode too, but you could check these all out in The Gross Room.
Yeah, we'll have all these stories linked in the corresponding post to this episode, so you could head over to thegrossroom.com for more info and to sign up.
Okay, now we're going to talk about cock rings. Do you know what a cock ring is, Maria?
Now that we're halfway into this episode, I'm thinking it's a tad inappropriate, the topics we're talking about as a mother and daughter combo, but
No, we'll get over it.
yeah, I do know what it is, but I really don't want to discuss like that.
Okay,
beyond
well,
that. So just get into the story.
I'll discuss it. It is a ring that men put around the base of their penis that is supposed to make their erections last longer and give them more intense orgasms. So, of course, they sell things for this at sex stores and online websites that are made, usually they're made out of silicone or something. And one of the rules is that men should put ones on that they could not only put on themselves, but easily get off of themselves, because if their one gets stuck on there, it's going to be a problem because it could strangle the blood supply, which can lead to gangrene, which can lead to a penis amputation. So it's serious. But you could do this safely, but people choose not to do this safely.
Well, in this case, this guy didn't use your average cock ring. He used a heavy iron barbell weight, which was approximately 10 pounds. What would a nurse typically do in this situation? Because, obviously, if it's to the point where they need medical information or medical intervention, I would assume that the penis is so swollen or having an issue that they can't just easily glide it off. And this is kind of a bigger piece of equipment, so I don't think they could just cut it off right there.
Well, a lot of the cases, most of the cases that I have of cock rings in the gross room are because people stick their penis through a wedding ring type of situation. So it could easily be squeezed through when the penis is soft, but then all of a sudden it gets erect and all of that blood flow makes it huge above the ring that's tying it off at the bottom there. And then men start freaking out and start trying, and instead of this is natural reaction, because if they just went back down to being soft again, they could easily get it back off the same way they got it on usually. But they start freaking out and they start trying to pull it off. And then you know what happens when you try to take a ring off and it doesn't come off. Your finger gets swollen, it gets irritated, and there's no getting it off at that point. Now, a lot of times in the emergency room, they're able to get off of these rings with wire cutters if it's a smaller thing. But my husband has a friend that's a firefighter that actually had to go to the hospital once to remove one of these things from a guy's penis.
Oh my God.
I know. This case is a little bit more extreme because Maria's talking about a 10-pound weight that you put onto a barbell. And think about the little hole that's in the center that you would use to put the barbell through. Well, this guy decided to put his penis through it, and his penis got huge and swollen behind it. And then he had to go into the emergency room with this thing wrapped around his penis. And of course, at the hospital, they don't have the equipment or the means to remove anything like this. So they have to call the fire department in to do it, because they use a saw to cut it off, and it creates heat and sparks, and there's risk from the blade cutting because the firefighters' tools aren't meant to be cutting close to people's skin like that. So oftentimes it's a combined effort between the firefighters and the doctors as well in order to make sure that the patient doesn't get hurt when they're trying to remove something like this.
This just seems like such a mess. Obviously, this was not a good idea to do something like this.
No, it definitely was not a good idea. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some different traumatic injuries that you could get from having sex, all different vaginal sex, anal sex. So we're going to get into some of the crazier stories that we have in the gross room.
All right, so this 28-year-old patient showed up to the ER and said that she had this mass coming out of her vagina. So at first, she wouldn't tell the doctors exactly what happened because her grandma was there, and of course, it was sex related, so she was a little embarrassed by that. But then when they got alone with her, she said that she had sex just minutes before this problem occurred. So what happened in this case?
So the doctors did an examination, and this mass that was coming out of her vagina, which is the diameter of a basketball, it's not a mass at all. It was actually her small intestines coming out of her vagina. So they were able to determine that she was having sex with such a large, big penis that it poked through the top of her vagina or the posterior fornix, and it caused a perforation or a hole in the top of the vagina, which made her intestines fall through that hole, and that's why they were coming out of her vagina.
So can you survive something like this? Your organs essentially falling out of your body?
Yeah, I mean, she survived. She's not dead. It's extremely uncomfortable, but fortunately, the surgeons were able to just kind of push her organs back up there and sew the hole shut, and she's fine. I just did a mystery diagnosis actually with a kind of a similar situation. So this is very unusual to happen in a 28-year-old woman that doesn't have any history of surgery or anything, but it's more common for things like this to happen when women have a history of having a hysterectomy, because when you remove the uterus from the abdominal or from the pelvic cavity there, they have to cut it off at the top of the vagina and sew it closed. And then that leaves an area of weakness that's always going to be prone to opening up, unfortunately. And it could happen from having vigorous sex, but it also, the case that I talked about in the mystery diagnosis a few weeks ago was a case where a woman was in a rather vigorous car accident, which caused that incision to open up, and she got air up inside of her abdominal cavity because that hole opened up. So you would be more expected to, my first question to this woman would be, oh, did you have a hysterectomy or something like that? But this was actually a hole that went through the top of her vagina. I guess she was having really rough sex, or the guy had a really long penis, or whatever happened. I'm not sure, but it's very unusual for this to happen. But the photos are really striking, and I can't imagine looking in the mirror and having pain after having sex and seeing my intestines in my underwear.
No, I mean, I'd be losing my mind.
Yeah.
I would certainly assume if I saw my organs outside of my body that was it for me.
It's actually funny that you're in that desperate and painful and outrageous situation and you're still afraid to say you had sex in front of your grandma. Like,
Well,
that's a pretty mean-ass grandma.
You know, some people are just assholes and like they won't want your well-being. They'll just criticize you for having sex, or like, you know, as we were talking about in our last episode, certain really religious people will weaponize that against you and say that's why you shouldn't be having sex.
Yeah, I get that.
All right, in this next case, this couple was having sex in a bed, and a picture that was hanging above the bed fell, glass shattered, and ended up stabbing this woman in the eye.
Yeah, so this is more of an outrageous thing that you wouldn't think would happen. This isn't because of penis, vagina itself. It's just more that this glass fractured, but it was pretty serious that it cut her nose and it went into her nostril and also cut the corner sclera of her eye, or the white part of her eye. But also she had to get 6 sutures because of it. So it's not like, oh, I just got a bump. I'm sure people have experienced things like that from time to time, but to actually have to go to the hospital because something broke because you were shaking the bed a little too much is kind of, I mean, it's funny in hindsight.
Let me tell you, over the course of doing this show and working for you, my medical phobia has been getting a little bit better, but every story in this episode is really bothering me. I don't know why. Just like eye stuff, urethra stuff, it's very uncomfortable to talk about and think about.
I know.
All right, this next one is about a 35-year-old who put an inflatable rubber pipe stopper in his rectum, and he hyperinflated it with an air gun connected through a pressure pipe. But he accidentally overinflated the rubber stopper and it burst.
So I'm not a plumber by any means, but I think I could figure out what this thing is. So I guess you would put this inflatable thing, like almost like an inflatable ball inside of a pipe in order to get the pipe to stop. So it fills up, it like plugs off a pipe. And he put this thing, I don't know why he got this genius idea to put this inside of his rectum, but like Maria said, it's like putting a ball inside and just inflating it. And the pressure from it being overinflated, especially because he was probably using an air compressor or something that just has a high PSI, the pressure of it burst through his abdominal cavity. The colon exploded, essentially. There was poop all up inside of his colon, and it caused bleeding in his chest and abdomen because the abdominal wall ripped open as well, and he died from that. And evidence of that scene at autopsy was when they opened the remainder of his abdominal cavity. It was filled with feces from the colon, and there were little air bubbles in it from all of that air pressure that had caused that to happen. So when the police investigated this death to see what happened, they saw that he was a regular contributor to several web forums dedicated to unusual sexual activities.
This just must have been a weird one to, for the emergency workers that picked him up and then doing the autopsy and piecing together exactly what happened.
Yeah, and it's just sad. There's no reason a person needs to die from something like that, and he wasn't trying to kill himself. It was just an accident, but it's also just like, okay, this guy's just not thinking that this could happen. I mean, it's similar to the case we were talking about the other day of the girl that died from breathing in a helium tank. It's just like people just don't think, and it sucks that somebody has to die for something like that.
All right, so our last case is about this 24-year-old woman. She said 24 hours after having anal sex, she started to have severe abdominal pain. At the hospital, they did some testing, and what did they see?
They saw that she had a tear in her upper rectum, so she did admit that she had consensual anal sex just 24 hours prior to feeling all of these symptoms. And what happened was it tore through her rectum, so it's similar to what we talked about earlier with the tear through the top of the vagina. In this case, it tore through her rectum, and she actually had to get surgery and remove that section of her rectum and get a colostomy bag for 3 months. But luckily, they were able to reverse the colostomy after 3 months, and she had no additional complications.
Wow, that's insane.
I mean, it's sex is a risk, and anal sex is a risk as well. It's something that needs to be done carefully, but it's something that can happen that you can't really predict sometimes.
Well, we hope you guys take these stories and have a safe, sexy Valentine's Day tonight. There is no kink shaming in this episode. We're simply just saying there are specific tools designed for safe sex, and you should use them and not do
We're just
dumb things
letting
you
you
read
know
on the
all
internet.
the possibilities. There's just so many possibilities out there.
Just be careful. Do whatever you want, but be careful out there. It's the message you should get from this episode.
If you have any good sex stories, too, you could always send them to us.
Yeah, send them to stories@motherknowsdeath.com or message them to us on Instagram. We will see you guys next week with some more news stories.
Happy Valentine's Day. Thank you for listening to Mother Knows Death. As a reminder, my training is as a pathologist assistant. I have a master's level education and specialize in anatomy and pathology education. I am not a doctor, and I have not diagnosed or treated anyone, dead or alive, without the assistance of a licensed medical doctor. This show, my website, and social media accounts are designed to educate and inform people based on my experience working in pathology so they can make healthier decisions regarding their life and well-being. Always remember that science is changing every day, and the opinions expressed in this episode are based on my knowledge of those subjects at the time of publication. If you are having a medical problem, have a medical question, or are having a medical emergency, please contact your physician or visit an urgent care center, emergency room, or hospital. Please rate, review, and subscribe to Mother Knows Death on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere you get podcasts. Thanks!